Hello, and welcome to Christ-Centered Reflections. I'm Reverend Donald Cosby, and with us today, Reverend Stephen Lawrence, Reverend Frank Tyson, and Reverend Jay Gardner for this special edition of Christ-Centered Reflections. Members of White Rock are joining us. We hope these reflections on the Lord and His Word will be helpful as you strive to follow the teachings of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. I'd like to start off with the book of Hebrews chapter 12, beginning at verse 1 and concluding at verse 3. I have two versions that I would like to read. The first version will be out of the New American Standard Bible, and it reads like this. Therefore, since we have such a great cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let us also lay aside every encumbrance and the sin which so easily entangles us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. Verse 2, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. For consider him who has endured such hostilities by sinners against himself, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. And the another version, the contemporary English version, reads like this. Such a large crowd of witnesses is all around us, so we must get rid of everything that slows us down, especially the sin that just won't let go. And we must be determined to run the race that is ahead of us. We must keep our eyes on Jesus, who leads us and makes our faith complete. He endured the shame of being nailed to a cross because he knew later that he would be glad he did. Now he is seated at the right side of God's throne. So keep your mind on Jesus, who put up with many hostile or insults from sinners. Then you won't get discouraged and give up. I'd like to just share with the thought this morning, the race and the gold, consider Jesus. So Paul, he looks at this, or the writer looks at this particular passage, and it actually picks up from the 11th chapter, the heroes of faith. And we see in the 11th chapter, if I may, it explains or gives us the testimonies of all the heroes of the Old Testament and how their faith afforded them the righteousness of God. The writer here in the 12th chapter says, therefore, since we have such a large crowd of witnesses, and the crowd of witnesses or cloud of witnesses is just a multitude that's referring to the folks in chapter 11. They have demonstrated their faith. And then the word does not mean, the witnesses does not mean that they're spectators, but rather they're bearing witness for us, that God can see us through all these particular things. Their faithfulness ought to be an encouragement to the Christian today to run this Christian race of faith, which has a purpose and a goal in mind. And that goal is nothing less than a likeness of Christ. So before we start this race, we need to do some things. Paul alludes to the athletes. He takes this metaphor as runners in a race. And in some instances, the Roman runners, they would run without any clothes on. The clothes became weight. The clothes became impediments. The clothes became blockages. Anything that would slow them down, they would get rid of. So that's why he says that we need to lay aside any encumbrance, any weight, any distraction, anything that would slow us down. And of course, when you look at a runner in a race, they have a lane, and they have to stay in their lane. I believe we as Christians need to stay in our lane. There's some things that distract us. There's some things that get us out of our lane. And I'm a firm believer that things that get our attention get us. So we have to stay in our lane, and we focus on that prize. The runner in the Roman races, they had one goal in mind. It was to win the race, to compete against one another. Albeit to say we don't compete against one another. We compete against the adversary. We compete against those things that come up against us that are not godly. So we have to make sure that we're focused on that prize, the end of the goal. And that's to be the likeness of Christ. That's to be able to receive that crown of glory. I like when I think of, what's the brother's name? Usain Bolt, fastest man alive. If you've ever watched him run against the other runners, Usain Bolt, when he starts off, of course he come out of craft, but when he starts running, he's straight up and down. He's horizontal. he's running and he's straight up and down. And the runners that are trying to catch him, they're putting their head down. They're doing all these other things that actually is causing the aerodynamics to slow them down. Whereas Usain Bolt, he's running straight up and his eye is fixed on the finish line. And then as he gets closer, he seems to get stronger. He gets stronger, and I believe that's what we ought to take in mind. That as we continue to go through these trials and tribulations, we ought to realize that we're not to become weary in doing good, that we should become stronger in our faith. So just to sum it up real quick, on this particular chapter, it's about spiritual maturity. We are a work in progress. I like to hear what the Sixers say. We need to trust the process. There's going to be many ups and downs, but we also have to be careful to stay in our lane. So anything that becomes an impediment or a distraction, we need to cast it aside. My distraction is the TV. I could be studying, and I'll keep the TV on. I'll have the sound up just enough so I can hear what's going on. And God forbid, don't let one of the reality shows be on. So then I stop what I'm doing, and I'm watching the TV. Okay, and then it's this thing that pulls me out of my studies. Now, I like to say this: impediments, distractions, they don't necessarily have to be sin, but they can lead into sin. The writer says right here, he says, lay aside every encumbrance. But then he adds and the sin. So he's separating the two. And the sin, and I love the CEV, it says, the sin that won't let us go. We're all sinners saved by grace. There's some things that we do that we know that it's not pleasing in God's sight. So when we run this race, we have to self-identify the things that are actually slowing our spiritual growth down. We need to throw it off.
Well, Cosby, I want to ask you a question about these encumbrances. I read the same piece that you were reading about the athlete and how they need to dress in order to run the race. You don't want clothing that gives you wind resistance.
Yes, sir.
So it's interesting that this encumbrance, it both means that which is too loose and that which is too tight.
Okay.
That's an interesting thing. It kind of suggested to me that there are some things that it may be easier to get rid of than some other things. Or even, again, I think I'd even read that since Greek athletes were so much into the perfection of the body, they would even have considered personal weight to be an encumbrance. So it's like the idea, not only do I have to find a garment that fits right, I have to lose some of my own girth. And we all know that's not easy to do. It's one thing to say, lay aside the weight and think that we can just easily do it like you take a coat off. Some things are a challenge to lose.
Exactly, and I think that's why he encourages us to not to become weary in doing it. We have to continue to strive. It's a work in progress. We have to, again, self-identify. We have to actually acknowledge the things that really get our attention away from God, and it becomes more personal.
When we think about encumbrances, what it comes to, I think, particularly in this model of looking at athletics, is the idea of discipline.
Yes, sir.
Because when we come just as we are, but as we are, need some work. And so the challenge, and one piece that I'm constantly challenged with is, I don't have to do the marathon today. Let's just start with, just one thing.
Yes, sir.
And you do the one thing, not just once, but if I can do the one thing routinely. So, I want to get into the discipline of particularly when we're talking about, our eyes on Jesus. So I want to get into the discipline of knowing what the Lord is saying. I want to get into the discipline of being in conversation with the Lord. I want to be in the discipline of letting my light shine. I want to work on that. And the thing is, my light is very dim. But to be able to share, even, be able to lift up that little bit regularly, to be able to begin there. And I think that's one of the challenges when we talk about this cloud of witnesses. Sometimes we look at those around us and go, wow, they're just so amazing. They just do everything right. And we look at ourselves and say, we're not quite there. Well, we look at this cloud of witnesses, and let's look at them and perhaps they are models that say,
That's right.
I didn't get here overnight.
Okay.
I started, a long time ago, and it took me bit by bit, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, that sort of thing.
Right. The chapter 11, the hearers of faith are our point of references. Their testimony bears witness to us that God is able.
I was thinking about this. What does it mean to look at Jesus? We think about that story where Peter is walking and looking, and then it says that he takes his eyes off Jesus and he begins to sink. That's a real clear physical image. And again, when we walk this Christian walk or run this Christian race, and we get distracted, sometimes easily, sometimes by whatever, the idea of keeping ourselves focused on Jesus or looking at Jesus, I'm trying to just work out what that looks like or feels like in an everyday piece. Maybe it's connected to the disciplines that we do daily, or maybe it's trying to look at a situation and imagine what Jesus is like in this situation. I know that for me it means not being content to figure it out in my own mind, or according to my own smartness. It really means taking a moment and saying, now let me back up and what does it mean for me to focus on Jesus in this situation? And does that get me, out of my distraction, out of my anger, out of my whatever, and help me look at the situation as it really is. I imagine Jesus doing this ministry and doing it with such a focus that he doesn't get distracted. And there's stuff happening around him all the time. I would have been distracted every moment. He's able to really stay focused. So that becomes just something to consider in my own discipline, my own walk. How do I keep focused on Jesus and not on the things of the world that are so alluring and tempting, and that's a strong discipline.
Any responses, questions to that?
In running, you have to understand, and using Usain Bolt as a good example, he ran a number of 100-yard dashes at home in his home country before he made it to the national and international field. And that's what we have to remember. Wow. It's not a one-time race. Oh, I did well in this particular situation, and now I can sit down. No, you made it through a situation.
Yes, sir.
There are more situations awaiting you, and each one is like a new race.
Amen.
And you do win some, and you lose some.
All right.
But the key is to keep at it to win the key race, which is the end race.
Yes.
Yes.
Amen. That goal. Thank you for viewing this edition of Christ-Centered Reflections. As always, we value your thoughts, questions, and feedback on what we discussed today. We encourage you to leave your responses on the White Rock Facebook page or on the Christ-Centered Reflections YouTube channel. Sure.